So inspired by youth who have an interest or feel compelled to write. Um, I uh, I did not start seriously writing until I was older, and I felt when I was younger, I really enjoyed writing, but I never saw it as any sort of avenue for me. I never felt encouraged enough to commit myself to writing. So I have such immense respect for all of you who find yourself on this path, whatever kind of path it is, and have decided to pursue writing. This is about the personal essay. And one of the things first of all, it's one of my favorite forms of writing. It's the first form of writing that really resonated for me. And I think we all have such important stories to tell. But one of the things I tell my student writers in graduate school is that no matter what kind of writing you like to do, whether you like to write science fiction, or whether you like to write poetry, or whether you like to write screenplays, you are eventually going to have to write a personal essay for something. So, this is an important skill for you to learn. You are eventually going to have to write a cover letter, which even is kind of a form of a personal essay, right? It has a specific directive where you're trying to seek and attain a certain job. But you've got to introduce yourself, and you've got to give a little snippet of a compelling story about yourself in a cover letter. If you apply to college, you will be writing some kind of personal essay or personal essays for college. If you become a published author, let's say you publish that science fiction novel, to promote that book, you're going to need to have essays published in various publications to draw attention to that book. You're going to need to be able to tell your story as a writer. And this is why personal essays are so important. But of course, on another level, they're important because they help us find communities of people that we share struggles with. They reach readers who are maybe suffering in some kind of way, looking for some kind of looking to be less alone in the world. And all reading connects us to people like that, but I think especially the personal essay does. So I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. If for some reason I don't see your question, please jump in, say something, wave your hand, and I will answer it.
I can monitor it too.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jordan. I want this to be as conversational as possible. I'm going to start out with a slideshow. And Jordan, is it possible for me to
share screen?
Share screen,
Should be able to.
Yes. Hopefully. Let's see. And if I share the screen, I don't think I can actually.
The trick is you should be able to see it too. You have to click on the presentation and then go to share screen, and then it should pop up an option to click it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you see it now? I can see it. Do you see it?
You still have to click share screen at the bottom of your Zoom chat.
Okay.
It should be a green button. Alternately, you can send it to me and I could share it, and you can just say turn slide, whichever works.
Oh, okay. You know what? Do you mind if I do that?
No.
I might do that, Jordan, because I'm not sure I can.
I know. It's not always as simple as it should
read. I know. Sorry, I should have.
No, we're all flexible.
We
all have big plans today, you know.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm not going to rely so much on the slideshow because I don't want to put people to sleep on this Saturday afternoon. But it probably is. It will allow people who want the information to not have to take notes. Or I suppose if it's recorded and posted, that'll be great too. All right. So I just sent you a link, Jordan. Hopefully you'll get it in your email.
You sent it to jordanwritelife@gmail.com?
Let's see. I sent it to the last.
Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. And then present. Okay. hang on a second. I think I'm almost there.
No problem. Thank you so much.
Let me get it into presenter view for you.
Awesome.
Can everyone see that? Yep. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So what I want to talk to you about this afternoon is some of the elements of what I think make up a compelling personal essay. You know, take what works for you. Feel free to discard what doesn't work for you. I just want to help make this process a little bit easier, because I know sometimes when we are tasked with telling the story of our lives, it can feel overwhelming, right? If you are 20 years old, you've got 20 years worth of stories to choose from. If you are 40, 50, 60 years old, you have that many more decades of life, of rich, riveting life experiences, and you might not know what to write about. And so I want to give you a little guidance for that. Okay, next screen, Jordan. Thank you. So one of the most important things to write about, to know about when it comes to personal essays, is that we are talking about nonfiction. Personal essays are not the kinds of things that you want to embellish. Sometimes terms get thrown around when we talk about this kind of writing. People call it literary nonfiction or creative nonfiction, which simply means it's uses literary elements of style, not such hard reporting like a newspaper, but it is still based in fact. So sometimes when you write an essay, you're not necessarily going to be able to just sit down and tell a story of your life, but you are going to have to talk to people who might be witnesses to the event or to your experiences. You might have to go into local newspapers to try to find out more information about an event that has to do with your story, journals, letters. There might be other sources. So sometimes writing a personal essay can involve quite a lot of research on your part. So just be prepared to have to use multiple sources when you're telling your own story. Next slide, please.
Don't know why that's cut off.
That's okay. I think it's just the W. What is the first word in that that's cut off? All right. What makes an essay compelling? Here are just a few notes that I have on what I find in essays compelling that I read. You may have additional or different standards on what makes you interested in an essay. Here are some of mine. So the big question I think we have for all essays is, you know, what is the writer trying to achieve, and are they effective in what they're trying to achieve? And there are parts to that question. So some of the things you should think about is there a strong hook at the beginning of the essay that sort of reels you in to the writer's personal experience? Think about the structure and the pacing, and we'll actually break these down in the next few slides, but this is just an overview. What is left unsaid? When you write a personal story, you're looking at a lot of material. Not all of it is going to go in the essay, though. Does the writer's voice shine through? This is your fingerprint on your story. And the big question for me is, what is the message or the lesson of the essay? So let's go to the next slide and break these down a little bit. All right. So what you'll see in many of the essays that you read, certainly not all of them, but in many of them, is what's called a hook. This is an element close to the beginning of the essay that usually is a conflict, but it starts the main character off on his or her journey. You are the main character in the personal essay, right? That's you. So there's some kind of event, some kind of conflict, some kind of tension that is introduced at the beginning, and you, the writer, is resolving that through the narrative arc. Hooks oftentimes, they're not always, hint at the setting. Make sure the reader understands their place and their time. Is this an event happening when you are 7 years old on a farm? Is this an event happening when you are 20 years old in a city? So giving the reader a little bit of sense of geography and where in the timeline of your life your story is taking place. Okay, next slide. All right, examples of good hooks. So this is a poem, but I just had to put it in here because this was such a wonderful poem. I don't know if you all had the opportunity to hear Amanda Gorman's inauguration poem, which was fantastic. But at the beginning of this poem is actually an excellent example of a hook, right? She said, when day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never ending shade? All right. Her hook is this really compelling question that is specific to a moment in history, right? This is a good hook. When she asks this question, we want nothing more as a reader than to keep reading, right? And that's what a good hook does. It entices the reader to keep reading that piece. Another example, I don't know, maybe some of you have read The Hunger Games, right? That's fiction, but it's still a great example for what a good hook is. So the hook in The Hunger Games, if you recall that novel, is the reaping, right? It's the beginning of the story. It's one of the opening scenes where Katniss volunteers as tribute to participate in the Hunger Games for her district, right? That is sort of the event, that is the conflict that's presented at the beginning of the story, which really takes you then through the whole rest of the book. And that's what a hook does. You want to make sure that the hook is as close as possible in time to the major story that you're telling, right? The hook is not your birth, especially if the story you're telling happens when you were 12 years old. You don't want to start the story at when you were born. You want to start it closer to an event that you are writing about when you are 12. Okay, next slide, please. All right. This is a link that has New York Times essay winners, teen essay winners in their most recent essay contest. And I pulled a couple of them that I thought were so well written and had really interesting hooks at their beginning. So this essay, and I put the link there so you can pull it up and read the other entrants. This essay was called Pants on Fire by Varya Kluev. And here they write, I never kissed the boy I liked behind the schoolyard fence that one March morning. I never had dinner with Katy Perry or lived in Kiev for 2 months either, but I still told my entire 4th grade class I did. So this is pretty compelling, right? She begins, or he, sorry, they, I don't know their gender. They begin the essay with a lie, right? And so as a reader, what happens? As a reader, the first thing you want to know is, why are they lying? Why would you tell this lie? Why would you tell this specific lie? Why tell these lies? Why is there more than one lie? And when you have the reader thinking about the questions that they suddenly feel compelled to answer, then you know you've got a good hook there. So let's go to the next one and we'll see another example. This is an essay from the same contest, Speechless by Maria Benavides. She writes, Mayfire? Morpher? The tournament judge called, squinting her eyes, trying to find the spelling error, although there was no error. It's Moffer. It's a nickname for my full name, Maria Fernanda. She stared at me blankly. My parents are creative, I lied, and she laughed. Again, this is a compelling hook because it has us as readers asking questions about what story the writer is trying to tell. What's the deal with this nickname? How did it come about? Why is the writer sort of lying about the origin of the nickname, right? They say, my parents are creative, I lied. Why lie about this? So this starts us out on the writer's journey. What is going to be the problem that is solved? What is going to be the conflict that's resolved? This is an interesting hook. Let's go to the next slide. All right. I want to talk briefly about structure and pacing. When I talk about that, I refer to how an essay flows or how an essay moves Another way to think about it is what does the essay look like on the printed page? Um, you know, essay writing has changed so much in the past 20 or 30 years. I mean, it used to be that every essay you read looked exactly the same, right? It was fairly chronological order, sort of average size paragraphs throughout. Um, and that was the kind of essay that you read that was printed in a newspaper or a magazine. The essay has morphed, I think, into one of the most exciting forms of writing. And writers of the essay are taking all kinds of risks. Um, so they're not necessarily going with sort of a straightforward chronological narrative that then has a few flashbacks. Sometimes they're completely transporting you in time. A scene when you're 5, a scene when you're 60 years old, a scene in between when you're 25 or 30 years old. Writers are taking risks in the form, and it's been so interesting to watch this evolution. And as writers have taken more risks, there are more publications, especially online publications, that are available to writers. I've seen lists that are in, I've seen essays that are in list forms. They are uh, numbered elements of sentences, and that's the essay. I've seen what's called flash essays. These are essays that are written in 300 or 400 words, very, very short essays. I've seen essays that start out very personal and then sort of zoom out to do some research and reporting that are related to the personal issue that was introduced at the beginning. Um, so this is what you need to consider as a writer. You also need to think about time. An essay you write might take place over one day, but it also might take place over several years of your life. And that's the choice that you have to make depending on what kind of story that you're telling. You will see some essays written in nothing but very short staccato type sentences. You will see other essays that are written with these very long and lush sentences. This is what we mean when we talk about structure and pacing. And very often, the structure and the pacing that you choose as a writer melds well with the type of story that you're telling. So lots of choices that you have here. All right, next slide, please. What's left unsaid? I think this is one of the most difficult things as a writer is to decide what doesn't go in your personal story. You know, personal essays are obviously personal. The problem is it's very hard for us to be objective as writers of personal essays when it comes to deciding what is really necessary for the reader to know about the essay and what the reader really doesn't want to know, right? We are the people who experienced it. So we feel, oh, but you have to know that my grandmother got me cotton candy at the circus in this story that I'm telling. But that might not be what a reader knows to follow along your story and to be immersed in your story. And in fact, a lot of information in your life might actually prevent a reader from fully immersing themselves in your story. You want to make readers feel hungry, right? You want them yearning more, sentence by sentence. You want them to be compelled to keep your essay in their hands, right? To keep it on their screen. And so you need to really pare down what you're trying to tell them, to only tell them the information that is necessary for the narrative arc of the story. Um, so think about that as you're writing. For some people like myself, that often means I write a lot of information in a personal essay. And then in my revision process, I am mainly cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting down until I figure out what the reader absolutely has to know. This is another time when you can rely on friends of yours who are writers to read your work. They're not so emotionally tied to the information because the experience didn't happen to them. It happened to you. And as a result, they might not be able to, they may be able to give you the better feedback that says, you know what, you went on a tangent here. That's really not a part of the personal story that you're trying to tell. Stick over here with this information, but leave this stuff out. And that's often the hardest thing when it comes to personal stories, is because it's hard for us to be objective about stuff that happened to us in our lives when we are trying to then write about it. But I promise you, the essay will be better if it says only what is necessary and sort of not all the stuff that happened in your life at that time. Okay, next slide, please. All right, voice. I touched on this a little bit earlier. Voice is sort of that intangible concept. It's hard to put your finger on it. But when I think of voice, I think of these things. I think of the sort of unique fingerprint that you put on your writing. And that can mean your style of writing, the sort of verb tense you choose, right? Are you telling the story in the past tense or in the present tense? Point of view. Many people write personal essays in the first person, right? I did this, I did that. Well, there are people who write personal essays in second person, in third person. So this is part of your voice as a writer. The language you use, what kind of words do you choose? What's the overall tone? A lot of people have experienced getting lost in life, right? Walking somewhere and getting lost and getting turned around, driving somewhere and getting lost and getting turned around, not knowing where you are. That's a common experience. But what will make your essay about getting lost important and interesting is your individual voice as a writer, is how you tell that story, what elements you use of craft, what point of view and perspective you use. Because every story has been told by now in the history of time, right? It's not like your personal essay is going to be telling a story that no one has ever heard of before, but you're going to be telling that story from your perspective. And it's your perspective and your voice that is going to cause people to pick it up and read it and not want to put it down, because it's the way you tell it that is what's special, right? It's the way you talk about your first extremely nerve-wracking experience of starting at a new high school, right? Lots of those stories have been told before about starting at a new high school, but it's yours that is going to connect with a group of readers who really need to hear that story because of the perspective and the voice that you bring. All right, so let's go to the next slide, please. All right, message or lesson. I'm sure you know this already. But I think it's the hardest thing of essay writing. Okay, so what distinguishes entries you might make in a diary from a personal essay are that a personal essay is providing a service to somebody else. You're providing a service to a reader. You are saying, you're going to learn something from this, what I'm writing, right? You're not just going to read it and put it down. You're going to come away with something. We as personal essayists are giving readers a tangible thing when they read our work. We are giving them a better understanding about the world or about people, human nature. We are making a comment on something that's socio-political or economic. We are delivering some information to them that will sort of expand their perspective as a human being. That's what we do in a personal essay. And that's what sets a personal essay apart from, a diary entry. Nothing against diary entries. I make them, I keep them. I've been writing diaries and journals for years. But that's what distinguishes them, is that when you read my journal entry or my diary entry, where I'm just sort of spitting out everything that happened to me and venting about all the struggles that I've been dealing with, and I'm sick of this pandemic, and I lost a document on my laptop, and I'm tired of cooking dinner. That's a vent, right? That's me just sort of complaining about stuff, or me, even if I'm being positive. Oh, this movie was fantastic. I really like it. Need to recommend it to some friends. That's for me. That's writing for me. A personal essay is writing for somebody else, though. You are writing for you. You are writing um, for your development as a human being, as a writer, but you're also writing for somebody else. You are writing for the reader. You are writing to give them something. And that's what I mean when I say the message or the lesson. Why are you writing this essay? That should be the question that you ask yourself even before you start writing it, right? You don't have to know the answer to it before you start writing it, but you should always ask yourself, what's the point of this essay? Why am I writing it? What nugget of information, of inflection am I giving the reader? What am I saying that they are going to get out of this essay? That's what makes a piece of writing a personal essay as opposed to a journal or a diary entry. And every essay must have this lesson or this message. Okay. This is what is of value to a reader. And this is also the hardest thing about writing a personal essay in my experience. I have had essays that I've worked on for 5 years that I still could not tell you what the message or the lesson was. And that's what needs to happen. That's what pulls the entire personal story together, is the message or the lesson. And some of those essays that I can't figure out what they're trying to say, I just have to set aside and come back to it for another day until I can get it together and figure out what that thesis is, what that message is, because that's what's gonna hit the home run here for a reader, is what they get out of it, not just what I write, but what they get out of the essay. So it's very hard, but try to think about what the message or the lesson might be before you start writing, because it does give you some kind of direction into what you're writing and what you need to put down on the page. All right, next slide, please. All right. Getting started. This is so difficult because, again, you are all of your experiences and you have all of these personal experiences to draw on to write a personal essay, right? To me, that's harder than fiction because I can decide, okay, this is the story I want to write. But when it comes to writing about my life, I think, gosh, there's so much to say. What am I going to actually say? What do I write on? So my personal method is to focus on a small unit of a thing in order to tell a bigger story. Okay, next slide. All right. So there are a couple sort of tools that I use to figure out how to get started. Okay. I sometimes try to focus on a ritual or a routine that I engage in, and then ask myself, why do I engage in that ritual or routine? Why is it important? What does it do? Why do I read books to my kids before they go to sleep at night? Why do I do that? That's a routine. It's every night. Why do I do that? Why do I do that? Why is that important to me? Why do I go for a run every morning? I don't do that. I would not run. But that's a question you might ask yourself. Why do I go for a run every day? Why is that important to me? Why do I have breakfast with my grandmother every Sunday? What does that do? What bigger story comes from the ritual of eating breakfast with my grandmother every Sunday? Because if you engage in a ritual or a routine like that, I'm guessing there is a reason. And I'm guessing that reason is bigger than just to have breakfast with my grandmother on Sunday. I'm guessing the reason is you want to learn from your grandmother. You want to learn more about your history and your ancestors. You want to feel less alone in the world and you feel connected to your grandmother. Your grandmother, maybe she's the only person you feel like you can really have a true and honest conversation with. So think about the routines or the rituals that you engage in your everyday life and see if there is a story in that. See if there are deeper reasons for you to engage in that ritual routine that maybe you hadn't even thought about until you started to sit down and try to write an essay. Second thing you can use is an object. Think of a meaningful object in your life. Why is it meaningful to you? What is so important about it? We were talking about, Rita and Jordan and I were talking about fountain pens earlier. Um, my father has this major fountain pen collection. So when he gives me a fountain pen for a birthday or a holiday, why does that fountain pen become so important to me? Not because I write with fountain pens, because I don't, but because that's him taking something important to him. And it's a form of communication of love, right? That's what's important, and therefore that's important to me. So an object is another way, a meaningful object in your life is another way for you to unlock an essay, right? What if you have an ancestor's piece of jewelry, for example? What does having that object, what does that mean to you? How important is it to you, and why is it important? That little object can unlock a much bigger personal essay. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I just wanted to give an example here of an essay about a ritual or routine that I really enjoyed reading. This is free and available online anytime somebody wants to pick it up. Roger Rosenblatt wrote this beautiful essay, and it actually eventually became a book. I actually thought it was better as a personal essay than a book, but anyway, it's an extraordinary essay. And the ritual that he focuses on is making toast every morning with his infant grandson. And what this is really a story about the fact that Roger's daughter, the infant grandson's mother, had suddenly died tragically in her 30s. She was very, very young. But so that's a big story about grief and unimaginable loss, right? The loss of a child. And he roots that, the foundation of that grief, though, is this morning ritual of opening up the door to where his 1-year-old grandson is sleeping at like 5:30 in the morning and making him toast every day. And that's the ritual that unlocks this much bigger story about grief and coping with loss. Okay, next slide, please. All right, essays about objects. And I think Jordan has read this essay before. Maybe some of you have. This is one of my favorite essays about objects ever. This is another essay in the New Yorker by a wonderful writer named Michelle Thomas. She wrote this essay called "The Christmas Wreath." So the Christmas wreath is the object that unlocks this bigger story, and the bigger story that Michelle is telling here is about holiday traditions, which of course are about what it means to feel what a home is, what family is, what is a community, what does a door keep in and keep out of one's home, right? The door is sort of the protector of the family, right? That's where family begins, is usually when you walk through a door. And the Christmas wreath during the holiday season is sort of the celebration of the relationships that live behind that door, that mark the difference between the public life and the more intimate private life. It's also a very funny personal essay with a great ending. So I highly recommend that you pull it up and read it when you have time. But it's a great example of how Michelle uses this simple item, this Christmas wreath, to unlock a much bigger story about holiday traditions and family traditions, and what it means to sort of have a protective barrier, a safety zone in one's home, to keep the good in and keep the bad out. So I highly, highly recommend that you read it. Okay, next slide. So I wanted to see if I could help you guys get started on a writing exercise. We do have some time left. Using a little information that we've gotten from the last couple of slides. One of the things that I do to get started when I'm trying to write an essay and I'm thinking about rituals or objects to help unlock a bigger story is I start out jotting down some notes that describe that object or that ritual using the five senses. So if I'm talking about a favorite very old, antiquated book that maybe somebody gifted me, or maybe I found it in an antique bookstore, I talk about how the book feels in my fingers, right? The sense of touch. How does the musty old book smell? What does it look like? Are the pages sort of warped and yellowed? What do the pages sound like when you open the book, right? Those crinkly pages. So I think about the five senses of an object, or the five senses involved in a ritual. And I jot those down. What am I feeling? What is it? What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I smelling, tasting, touching? And then I think, number two, I think, what feelings does this ritual or this object evoke, right? How does this book make me feel? What is it? When I hold the book, what does it do for me, right? And then when I've sort of described how an object or ritual makes me feel, I then think about, without even really starting the essay, what the message or the lesson could be that I use this object or ritual to convey. What am I trying to say about this, right? So if we go back to the example of the ritual of having breakfast with your grandmother every Sunday morning, we would describe the five senses, right? Like, what does the breakfast taste like? What does it feel like to hug your grandmother when you greet her in the mornings before breakfast? What does the conversation sound like? Is it somber? Is it really fun and happy? Use those senses to describe that ritual. And then I think about, when I write about my feelings about that, what does that do for me? Do I leave with a lighter heart when I'm with her, after I've been with her? Do I miss her? Do I feel any sense of fear of getting older, of being lonely, of not having companionship? So that's a little bit about what those feelings are for that ritual. And then the lesson or the message. What am I trying to convey about this? Is the message or the lesson that my grandmother is the only person who really ever understood me? Is she the only person that I could ever be honest with? So we've got some time. I wanted to see if I could give people maybe 5 minutes or so. And this is the last slide, but maybe we could leave it up and give people 5 or so minutes to answer the questions, jot down sort of what the ritual or object is, describe them in five senses, describe what those feelings evoke from those objects or rituals, and then maybe consider the message or the lesson of what you could write about these objects or rituals. So anyone have any questions about that before they get started?
Should we put it in the chat and just like type them out in the chat, or just like, would that get too messy?
I think, that's a good question. What do you think, Anjali?
I'm not sure, because as soon as you hit enter, it goes up, right? And if people are not putting, it's up to you. I mean, I guess if you maybe write it out somewhere else and then transfer it to the chat, then it would be all together.
That's a good idea.
So if you can write it either pen or paper or on some, in a Word document or whatever,
Maybe
write it all out and then stick it in the chat. But not everybody has to share. I want to say that too. I'm not forcing anybody to share work who doesn't want to share work. So if you feel comfortable, put what you write in the chat, or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, but want to share what you wrote about, you can just sort of read a little bit off of what you wrote, or just describe what you wrote, or your thinking on what you could use your object or ritual to write for a fuller essay.
Do you want me to time the 5 minutes on my little timer here?
Yeah, that would be awesome.
All right, and go. Just about a minute left on the timer. Twenty seconds. There it is.
Awesome. I hope you guys got a chance to jot down some information that can lead to perhaps writing a full essay in the future. Is there anyone, and Jordan, if you like, we can probably get rid of the screen share if that helps people.
Yeah, I'm going to go to gallery view now so we can see each other.
Okay, great.
And I don't see any in the chat, but maybe someone would like to read theirs aloud. I'm not sure.
Is there any volunteers about, ooh, we've got something here from David. Oh, I love it. David, do you want to read what you wrote?
Yeah, I'll read what I wrote because my camera was off because I was actually eating my my amazing guacamole. So I just ordered a cup of dense and earthy smelling guacamole from Chipotle. It's multi-textured and multicolored. Green texture. I used texture twice. I should have used that. Green texture livens my taste buds as I taste centuries of culture and custom with each loud crunch of my tortilla chip. So I think I covered all 5 on there.
That is wonderful, David. So what is the specific culture that you're connecting this guacamole to?
The Mexican culture, I'm from California, so I associate my love of guacamole with growing up in a very Mexican neighborhood.
And have you had a chance to talk about, to think about, and it's okay if you haven't, it was only 5 minutes, what possible message or lesson that you could tell with this guacamole, which is really, the guacamole is really just, it's the portal, right? For you to open up a much bigger story about your life or your culture and your heritage. So
I think,
go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think you're right about that. I think me as a historian, I love researching and learning about other people's cultures from all around the world. And I think growing up in a very multicultural community in the Bay Area of California and experiencing the different tastes and the sounds and the sights of people, the way people dress, the way people spoke, the different languages, the foods, everything is what makes it a big part of who I am. Mm-hmm. So the guacamole is not just literally a meal from a fast food chain. It represents what America really is the adoption of multifaceted cultures to express a more humanity sense of who we really are, through food.
That is a great story. I really like that. And there is a timelessness of Mexican foods as well, right? Mexican foods predated the United States, right? They were here first, right? Yeah. So there's a interesting, that it feels eternal when we talk about the histories of foods, because they often come before a lot of histories of people themselves. So that's fascinating. I love that.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wants to share their idea of either an object or a ritual and give us any sense of where they might go with that?
I will.
Awesome.
Okay. So this is about an object that I don't have in my possession,
Okay.
rather than something I have. So I'm trying to recreate the loss of that object. So here we go. So now it's not letting me put it in the chat. So maybe I should just read it.
Yeah, read it.
Would that
Yeah.
be okay? All right.
That sounds great.
Okay, so this is called Losing One's Purgatory. I started typing on the clanky keys of my Mac this morning with a warm, aromatic cup of coffee in hand. I realized that I don't have a copy of my dissertation, not in print and not electronic. I never ordered a print copy from the university I graduated from. Those black hardbound covers that I imagined would get the smell of old paper someday, I must have been thinking decades into the future. Well, it is about 2 decades forward, and all this time I haven't considered the need to have it in my possession. I wonder why. The laptop I saved it on went kaput 7 years ago. Then I remembered what prompted the feeling of loss. I had a dream last night that I never finished the last chapter of my dissertation and therefore did not ever get a doctoral degree. In the dream, I thought maybe there's still a chance after all these years that I can finish. I could write that last chapter. I had a germ of an idea of portrayal of women's sexuality in South Asian films. Yes, maybe, just maybe I could start. Would it work? Did I have the wherewithal left to sit down and write after all these years? Perhaps my professors would approve letting me back into the PhD program to finish up. I woke up realizing it was only a dream, classically known as an anxiety dream. That chapter had been written and even published years ago.
Wow, you wrote that in 5 minutes.
It was like a revision of something I had before.
Still, that is
writing class.
really something. So, I mean, I have a lot of, there's so many things you can do with that. So, I mean, obviously a dissertation, right, is the object here. And what is a dissertation? It is a culmination of years of investment in studying, right? In your intellect, in research, in your whatever field it is that you pursued. And you feel a tremendous loss there because you don't have it. Now, where is it now?
No idea. I just don't have a print copy. I lost the CD it was on. It's in a library somewhere, but if I wanted an electronic copy of it from a library website, I'd have to pay for it.
Wow. So there's an interesting story there about why you even became disconnected from it, right?
Yeah.
Like not only what the loss caused you to feel, but what is it about the fact that you hadn't sort of made the effort to get a copy of it in a while? Are you a different person today? Would you have written the same dissertation if you wrote it today? Are you disenchanted with the field that you wrote your
I accidentally muted you. I was trying to chat to you, Anjali. I'm so sorry. That's horrifying. I apologize. Oh, that's awful.
Okay.
Cut you off mid-sentence.
No problem. So that unearths a lot of stuff there. That would be a really compelling essay to write about, the dissertation, right? That's seen as like, the gold medal of education, right? It is so lofted when you think about academia, when you think about formal education. And so anyway, I hope you end up writing that essay. Do we have any questions? Because we are at 3:01 right now, so I know I have to wrap up. So does anyone want to ask a question about essay writing, about writing, anything?
If it's okay, I have a question. I don't want to monopolize the time, but
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm trying to write a family memoir, and you know, being from India, there's a lot of intricacies about a different culture than American culture. And I've been trying to fit it into a hero's journey character arc, and it just doesn't work because there's so many layers, there's so many different family members, and I don't want to just tell my own story. It is about what I've learned about my family, but it's not just my journey. So, so what do you think about, you know, writing that doesn't follow that arc necessarily? Do you have examples of things that I could look at, or what are your general thoughts about not following that typical narrative?
So a memoir does not have to be necessarily a story that focuses on you. One of my favorite memoirs is Jessamine Ward's The Men We Reap.
Mhm.
She tells her life story through 5 men that she loved and lost in her life.
Uh-huh.
So like her brother, one is a cousin, and they all died young and they died tragically. Well, all young death is tragic, but they died very young, unexpectedly, like a best friend. So this is a story of her grief and her search for the systemic issues that society has that very much played into their deaths. They grew up. They were low income, lived along the Gulf Coast, and experienced a lot of injustice as Black men. But that's an example, and there are many out there of memoirs that are not necessarily like Jessamine doesn't put herself in the center of that arc. She is the person that connects the 5 of them together because she had close relationships with all 5 of them. But she is really telling more of their stories than she is telling her story. But it's still a memoir. That's an example of one. Another example, Maggie Nelson wrote this fantastic book called Bluets. It's basically a memoir told through the color blue. And it's written like a long extended poem. But she's not necessarily centering the whole story around her life. It's really about how the color blue has connected her to so many facets of her life, of her community's life, and what it signifies for her. So yes, a personal memoir doesn't necessarily have to be just solely about your life and only have your life being the sort of the hero's journey, as you referred to. You can actually write quite a lot about other people and about other things and still have it considered a memoir, because it is ultimately your lens, right? Your perspective and your point of view that is sort of the foundation for the story. But you don't have to be at the center of that story at all times.
Mhm. Thank you. That really helps.
You're welcome. And my father's originally from India, so I write a lot about sort of South Asian family and stories and that sort of.
I can't wait. I can't wait. Is that your new publication?
Yeah, so the collection of essays I have coming out in April is called Southbound. So I do write quite a lot about that in the book. Actually my novel is about the 1947 partition. So kind of both are very connected to the subcontinent.
Okay, I'm gonna get on Amazon or my bookstore right now and get those.
Yeah, and I just wanted to let anyone who would like to receive the recording of this, or Anjali, are you willing to share the slides? People.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if anyone would like those, if you can put your email in the chat, we'll make sure to get those to you at some point. And also kind of keep you updated about future speakers. But how about one last question, and then we'll let Anjali go back to her day.
And you can go on literarylegacies.org to find other videos of other speakers we've had in our Facebook, in our YouTube page. Look us up on there.
Yeah, we've had a few wonderful speakers, and we're so happy to have you. Any last questions? Anyone? Okay, well, I know if anyone does have a question, I don't know if Anjali, if you want to give your email address, but you can feel free to email me. I could forward it on to her.
Yeah, I'm happy to give my email address. I'm so bad at using chats, which is why I
I
always,
can, let me,
yeah. So I just put my email address in the chat. It's very easy. She started it at gmail.com.
perfect. I love that.
I got this email address years ago, and then I just never bothered changing it to something more professional sounding. So you can feel free to email me if you're on social media, something like Twitter. I'm also on Twitter, and you can write me a DM or Instagram, which I don't check as often, but yeah, feel free to ask me a question. Thank you so much for having me, Jordan.
Thank you for coming. It was wonderful.
An honor to be here, and what a great program that you have. It's so necessary and important, and I was really excited to learn about it.
Yeah, we're very happy. Well, thanks to everyone for showing up. Stay in touch with us. We will try and stay in touch with you. Look forward to our next couple of speakers, which we're still working on at the moment. And thank you again, Anjali. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Thank you so much. You all take care. Happy writing.
All right, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.